Have you ever felt overwhelmed by life's worries, not knowing how to find peace in the midst of so many challenges? Or perhaps you've sought relief and still feel trapped in anxiety. In this video, we'll talk about how you can surrender your anxieties to God and find true rest in His presence. Life is full of pressures, but the Bible teaches us that we don't have to carry this weight alone. We'll see together how trusting in God's sovereignty and experiencing a peace that surpasses all understanding can transform your life. If you're tired, anxious, or simply looking for a way to live more lightly and confidently, this video will show you the way to leave your burdens in God's hands. Now, before I continue, I want to ask you something simple but powerful. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I trust in the Lord with all my heart." By doing this, you are declaring your faith and beginning to live this truth. This act of faith is the first step towards experiencing the peace and rest that God has for you. So stay with me, because what follows could change the way you deal with your worries and anxieties. In an increasingly fast-paced world, we are constantly bombarded with worries. Anxiety about the future, challenges at work, health, relationships, and even global events affect us on a daily basis. Life always seems to be pressing down on us, and expectations can leave us feeling overwhelmed. It's easy to feel lost or out of control in the face of so many responsibilities and uncertainties. For the Christian, these worries are opportunities to reflect on where we are putting our trust. In the midst of this chaos, God offers us a simple but powerful solution. Rest in Him. The Bible repeatedly reminds us that when we surrender our anxieties to God, we find peace, strength, and direction. God's promise is that even in the midst of challenges, we can live with peace of mind and confidence, knowing that He is in control. Now, I invite you to reflect. What has been taking away your peace lately? What worries have occupied your mind and heart? Now is the time to seek rest in God. In the following verses, you will find powerful tools to overcome anxiety and live in peace, trusting in God's care. Open your heart and get ready to discover how God's Word can transform your worries into inner peace. Number 1. The peace that exceeds all understanding. Life often puts us in situations that seem out of control, and anxiety arises as an almost automatic response. We worry about the future, about what will happen tomorrow, about the decisions we need to make. It is in this context that God invites us to a different path, one that seems to go against what the world teaches us. In Philippians 4:6-7, we are called to be anxious for nothing. What a bold request, isn't it? After all, how can we not worry in a world full of challenges? But God, in His wisdom and love, doesn't ask us to do the impossible. He gives us a solution. In everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. The key to overcoming anxiety is here. It's not pretending that problems don't exist, but taking them to God. He wants you to share your worries, to entrust your fears and insecurities into His hands. And here comes the promise. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. This peace, which goes beyond what we can understand, is not the fruit of perfect circumstances. On the contrary, it is a gift from God that takes hold of our hearts, even when the circumstances around us don't change immediately. It's like being in the middle of a storm, but feeling protected and safe because you know that God is in control. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack full of worries, fears, and insecurities. Now imagine that God is by your side, asking you to take that backpack off of you. Prayer is the moment when you decide to hand over this burden to Him. When you pray, you are saying, "Lord, I trust you. I know I don't have to carry this alone." And in that act of surrender, something incredible happens. The weight begins to disappear. Not because the problems have simply disappeared, but because you have chosen to trust in the one who has the power to solve them or strengthen you to face them. The peace that surpasses understanding doesn't depend on what you feel or see. It is like a beacon in the midst of darkness, guiding you even when the paths seem uncertain. By trusting in God, fear loses its power and anxiety begins to dissipate. Each time you take your worries to Him in prayer, this peace grows within you, guarding your mind and heart. Remember that God is not indifferent to your struggles. He cares deeply about every detail of your life, and it is this certainty that you are not alone that transforms anxiety into peace. When you pray, it's not just an exchange of words, but an exchange of burdens. You give your worries to God, and He gives you His peace. Number 2, trust in God's care. How often do we find ourselves worrying about tomorrow, about what we're going to eat, wear, or how we're going to deal with the challenges of everyday life? Jesus knew that this is a common concern for all of us, and in Matthew 6:25-27, He offers us a profound lesson on trusting in God's care. He tells us, "Do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear." Jesus uses a simple but powerful image: the birds of the air. They don't plant, they don't harvest, they don't accumulate in barns, and yet God feeds them. If He takes care of such small and seemingly insignificant beings, how much more will He take care of you? This is the question that Jesus puts before us, inviting us to reflect on how often we worry unnecessarily. He challenges us to remember that we are infinitely more valuable in God's eyes than any other being in creation. But in our daily lives, it's easy to forget this truth. We are bombarded by worries, by a constant desire to control every situation. And yet, Jesus invites us to trust, to rest in the certainty that God knows our every need. He reminds us that worry cannot add a single day to our lives. On the contrary, it only robs us of the present, tires us out, and takes us away from the trust we should have in the loving care of our Heavenly Father. Trusting in God's providence is like walking in a flowery field, knowing that no matter what happens, the flowers will continue to grow, the sun will continue to shine, and the birds will continue to sing. Just as God sustains nature, He is sustaining your life. This doesn't mean that we won't have challenges or moments of uncertainty, but it does mean that in each of these moments, God is already working on our behalf, even when we can't see it. Think of your life as a winding road that you are traveling. Sometimes the view ahead can be obstructed, and you don't know what the next step will bring. Trusting in God is like being sure that even when you can't see what's around the bend, God is already there, preparing the way. He knows every detail of your journey and has already provided what you need, be it strength, sustenance, or peace. When we surrender our worries to God and trust in His providence, we stop living in fear of tomorrow. Instead of spending our energy worrying about what might happen, we live in the present, enjoying the daily provision He offers us. This trust is not passive, it is active. It's choosing every day to believe that the same God who cares for the birds of the air and clothes the lilies of the field is taking care of every detail of your life, providing for your needs, big and small. So, when worry begins to grow inside you, stop for a moment. and look around. The birds are singing, the trees are growing, and everything around you reflects divine care. If God cares for all creation with such zeal, you can rest in the certainty that He is also caring for you, because you are precious to Him. Number 3, casting our anxieties on God. Anxiety is a weight that we all carry at some point. It's like a backpack full of stones, which, the further we walk, the heavier it becomes. God, in His infinite goodness, invites us to cast these stones on Him. In Psalm 55, verse 22, we read, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you." And later in the New Testament, the Apostle Peter echoes this message in 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your cares on Him, for He cares for you. This idea of casting is powerful. We are not called to deal with our fears, insecurities, or worries alone. God invites us to cast it all on Him. And that word, cast, carries with it the image of a complete surrender, as if we were throwing our worries into His hands, trusting that He is able to carry them for us. We are not made to carry this weight alone, and God knows that. He sustains us in our weaknesses, gives us strength where we feel incapable, and welcomes us with His loving care. This message, present in both the Old and New Testaments, reminds us that God's care is constant. He does not change, and His promises do not fail. In the psalm, we are reminded that when we cast our burdens on Him, He will sustain us. Peter, in turn, reinforces this trust. We don't need to keep our anxieties to ourselves, because the God who takes care of the big and small things in the universe also takes care of us. Surrendering our anxieties to God is a daily act. It's not something we do once and everything is solved instantly. In fact, it's like learning to let go of control, little by little, trusting that God is in charge. Imagine you're holding a bucket full of water. Every day, it gets heavier. Daily surrender of anxieties to God is like emptying that bucket before it overflows, letting God carry the weight for you. This surrender brings incredible freedom to the heart. When we hold on to our worries so tightly, we get stuck in fear, insecurity, and what may or may not happen. But when we decide to trust God, peace begins to enter. It's like opening the windows of a dark house and allowing sunlight to enter and illuminate every corner. The light of God's peace fills the spaces that were previously filled with worry. This daily practice brings us closer to God's peace in a concrete way. Every time you choose to pray and surrender your anxieties to Him, you are getting a little closer to this peace that surpasses understanding. Over time, you begin to realize that God, faithful as He is, always takes care of you. It may not be exactly the way you imagined, but it's always the way you need. To cast our anxieties on God is to trust that He is sustaining us at every step. It's not ignoring problems, but recognizing them and handing them over to the One who has the power to solve them. When you do this, you experience an inner lightness, because you know that you are in the hands of a God who not only sees your struggles, but cares about them. So, every day, choose to cast everything that weighs on your heart onto Him. With each surrender, you are opening yourself up to living more fully in God's peace and care. Like a loving father who takes his child's hand to guide him, God is always ready to carry your worries while leading you along the path of peace. Number 4, absolute surrender and trust. Trust is one of the greatest challenges of our faith journey. We want to be in control, to resolve situations in our own strength, but God invites us to something much deeper: total surrender. In Psalm 37 verse 5, we are exhorted to commit your way to the Lord. trust in him and he will do it. And in Proverbs 3:5-6, the wisdom is clear. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. These verses speak to us of a trust that goes beyond reason. Trusting in the Lord wholeheartedly means giving him not just part of our lives, but everything, our dreams, fears, plans, and even the areas we would like to control. It's a trust that refuses to rely on our limited understanding of circumstances. Often we can't see what God is doing behind the scenes, but he asks us to trust him, knowing that his plans are always better than ours. When the psalmist says, "Surrender your way," he is inviting us to give up trying to chart our own path apart from God. It's like handing over the wheel of a car and letting God drive. It's recognizing that he knows the final destination, that he knows the best way and the best routes, even when we don't understand every bend in the road. This absolute surrender is a decision of faith. It is recognizing that God not only knows what is best for us, but also has the power to bring about what is good. Trust in God is something that must be practiced daily, and this practice brings rest to our souls in surprising ways. Think, for example, of someone who is going through a difficult time financially. The natural tendency would be to worry, to try to solve everything on their own, and sometimes to fall into despair. However, when that person decides to hand over that worry to God, trusting that he will provide in due time, there is an invisible exchange. The weight of worry is replaced by rest in God's provision. Another practical example is when we are faced with an important decision in life, be it about a job, a relationship, or a big step. When we turn that decision over to God in prayer, recognizing that he knows best, we begin to see the right doors opening and the wrong ones closing. And even if we don't understand why certain doors close, the confidence that God is guiding us on the right path gives us peace. We don't need to know all the details of the future, because we trust in the one who holds the future in his hands. Trusting in the Lord also teaches us to rest in his promises instead of despairing in the circumstances. It's like when a child holds his father's hand while crossing a busy street. The child may not understand the direction or see all the dangers, but he trusts that his father knows what he's doing. In the same way, when we place our absolute trust in God, we stop trying to understand every detail and rest in the certainty that he is in control, watching over us every step of the way. This rest doesn't mean the absence of problems, but a change in the way we deal with them. Instead of being consumed by anxiety or fear, we experience a peace that can only come when we surrender our lives completely to God. The Lord promises to direct our steps and straighten our paths, and this frees us from the pressure of trying to control what we cannot. Total trust in God is like handing over the reins of our lives to the Creator of the universe, who loves us deeply and has a perfect plan for us. And in doing so, we find a rest that the world cannot offer. A rest that comes from the certainty that whatever happens, we are safe in the hands of our Heavenly Father. Number 5, relief for the tired and overburdened. In a world where emotional and physical fatigue seem to be everywhere, Jesus' words in Matthew 11:28-30 are like a balm for the soul. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus is speaking directly to those who feel oppressed, crushed by the burdens of life. He recognizes the weight we carry, the worries about work, family, health, internal struggles, and offers us something incredibly simple but profoundly transformative: real rest, real relief. But what does he mean by taking on his yoke? In Jesus' day, a yoke was a piece of wood that bound two animals together so that they shared the load while plowing a field. When he talks about the gentle yoke, he is inviting us to exchange the heavy burden of trying to do everything for ourselves for the yoke he offers. Christ's yoke is not a burden that oppresses us, but an invitation to walk side by side with him, to let him share our struggles and lighten them. By describing his yoke as gentle and his burden as light, Jesus is not promising that we will never have difficulties, but he is assuring us that as we walk with him, the weight of our worries will be lifted because he is with us, sharing the burden. We don't have to carry everything alone. Christ is by our side, and his presence makes the burden lighter. Imagine you're walking down a long road, carrying a backpack that seems to get heavier with every step. The weight is on your back, your shoulders ache, and you feel like you won't be able to go much further. Then Jesus appears beside you and offers a trade. "Let me carry this for you. I'll give you something lighter to carry." That's the exchange he proposes to us, to give up our heavy burdens and take on his yoke, which is soft and light. This exchange begins with a simple but profound choice: to come to him. Jesus calls us to come to him, and this act of going is the first step towards finding rest. When you turn to Christ in prayer, when you decide that you are no longer going to try to solve everything on your own, you are beginning this exchange. It is in this moment of surrender that you begin to feel the relief that he has promised. Taking Christ's yoke means learning from him. He invites us to learn from him, to walk at his pace, to follow his teachings. We often overburden ourselves because we try to carry burdens that weren't meant for us. We try to solve everything in our own strength, forgetting that Christ is by our side, ready to guide us. When we learn to trust in him, to rest in his gentleness and humility, we find a new way of living, a way that brings relief to our hearts and minds. Christ teaches us that true peace and rest don't come from the absence of problems, but from walking alongside him who helps us carry what we couldn't alone. So, exchanging our burdens means handing over our fears, frustrations, and anxieties to him and accepting his direction, comfort, and care. Every time you feel overwhelmed, remember this invitation from Jesus. He is always by your side, ready to take your worries and give you the rest you so desperately need. Christ's gentle yoke doesn't mean that there will be no challenges, but it does mean that you will never have to face them alone. When you walk with him, each step becomes lighter, because the weight is shared with the one who has the power to carry all things. True rest is found when you hand over control to Jesus and trust him to guide your steps. Thus, each day you can choose to leave the burden that weighs you down with him, and in return, receive the lightness of his presence. This is Christ's promise: relief for the weary and rest for souls. Number 6. God is our strength and refuge. In the midst of life's difficulties and uncertainties, we are often reminded of our limitations. Fear and insecurity can easily take over, especially when we face situations that are beyond our control. It is precisely at these moments that God's promise in Isaiah 41:10 offers us incredible strength. "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you and uphold you with the right hand of my righteousness." God invites us not to fear, He knows that fear can paralyze us, can make us doubt his presence, but he reminds us that he is our refuge, the one who is by our side in all circumstances. This promise doesn't mean that we will never go through struggles, but that in the midst of them, we will not be alone. He is our strength when we feel weak, our refuge when the storms of life seem to overwhelm us. Psalm 46:10 complements this truth by telling us, "Be still and know that I am God." This is a clear command for us in the midst of chaos to learn to trust in God's sovereignty. To be still is not just to be outwardly silent, but to find inner peace in knowing that, regardless of the circumstances, God is in control. He is our safe haven where we can take refuge and find rest, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Living in peace and rest, even in the face of challenges, is like learning to walk on turbulent waters without being overwhelmed by fear. Imagine a boat in the middle of a storm. The waves are strong, the wind is intense, but inside the boat there is an anchor. This anchor holds the boat steady, preventing it from being carried away by the currents. God is that anchor for our lives. When we anchor our faith in Him, the challenges may rock us, but they won't bring us down. The first key to living in peace is to recognize that we are not in control, and that is liberating. We often carry the weight of wanting to solve everything in our own strength, but the truth is that God is already in control. When we learn to rest in this certainty, peace begins to fill our hearts. Knowing that God is directing the course of our lives allows us to let go of the reins and trust that He knows best. Living in peace also requires an active attitude of surrender. Faced with challenges, instead of reacting with anxiety or despair, we can pause, pray, and remember God's promises. He has told us not to fear because He is with us. This simple act of remembering and trusting in His word helps us to cast off fear and reconnect with the peace He offers. Another important practice is to learn to be still. The world around us is constantly on the move, pushing us to act, react, and solve everything. However, God invites us to do the opposite, to be still. This means stopping for a moment, taking a deep breath, and remembering that God is sovereign. When you feel like the challenges are drowning you, take time to be in God's presence, quiet your heart, and trust that He is at work, even when you can't see it. Living in peace and rest, even in times of difficulty, is a daily choice of trust. It is choosing, in every situation, to hand over your worries to God and rest in the fact that He is your refuge. God doesn't promise us a life without problems, but He does promise to be present in each one, strengthening us and giving us refuge. With Him, we can walk without fear, because we know that we are safe in His hands. Whatever challenge you're facing right now, remember, God is your strength. When you feel weak, He will sustain you. When fear tries to paralyze you, remember that God is your refuge, and you can find rest and peace in His presence. Number 7, God's perfect will. In Romans 8:28, Paul reminds us of one of the most encouraging promises in Scripture. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. This verse carries a deep and transforming meaning, especially when we face times of uncertainty or difficulty. The promise that all things work together for good for those who love God does not mean that everything that happens in our lives will be easy or pleasant. On the contrary, we know that life is full of challenges, losses, and moments of pain. However, this promise points to something greater. God, in His sovereignty, is always working in our lives, even in the most difficult moments, to bring about a greater good that we often can't see right away. Think of it like a tapestry. When we look at the reverse side, all we can see are knots and tangled threads with no clear pattern. But when the tapestry is turned over, the design is revealed in all its beauty. In the same way, we're often looking at the wrong side of our lives, where everything seems confused and meaningless. But God, the great weaver, is working on every detail to create a perfect image, even if we can't yet see the whole picture. The good that God promises is not necessarily what we think of as immediate comfort or the absence of suffering, but it is good that is aligned with His greater purpose for our lives. God sees beyond the present moment and is orchestrating all things for our spiritual growth so that we can conform more and more to the image of Christ and fulfill the purpose for which we were created. Trusting in this promise requires deep faith and genuine surrender. In the midst of difficulties, our natural tendency is to ask, why? Or, how can this be good? However, instead of trying to understand every detail in the moment, we are called to trust that God is orchestrating everything for the greater good, even when we can't see it. Imagine that your life is like a jigsaw puzzle. You may be holding a piece that doesn't seem to fit anywhere, perhaps a moment of loss, a disappointment, or an unexpected struggle. But God sees the whole picture. He knows where each piece belongs, and, at the right time, He will put them together in a way that makes sense. Our part is to trust that however disconnected a part of our life may seem, God is working to complete the final picture, which is always for our good and His glory. This trust also gives us the strength to keep going in the midst of adversity. When we go through challenges, we can remember that nothing is wasted in God's hands. He is able to use our pain, our mistakes, and even the situations that seem hopeless to shape our lives according to His purpose. Everything, the joys, the sorrows, the moments of victory, and the moments of weakness, is in the hands of a God who knows exactly what He is doing. So when difficulties arise, instead of getting discouraged, trust that God is working something greater. You may not see the immediate good, but the story is still being written. The same God who called you loves you deeply and is leading you on a path that leads to good, peace, and the fulfillment of His perfect purpose. Trusting in God's will is like being in a boat, sailing on a turbulent sea. The waves can be frightening, but you know that the captain of the boat is experienced and knows exactly where he is taking you. With God in control, we can rest in the certainty that He is using even the storms to take us to the final destination, which is always good because it is planned by Him. So, whatever situation you're facing right now, remember, all things, even those that don't make sense at the moment, are working together for your good. God is in charge, and His will is perfect. Trust in Him, because in the end everything will fall into place in the wonderful plan He has for you. Throughout this reflection, we have seen how God offers us peace, refuge, and rest, even in the midst of life's challenges and uncertainties. Now is the time to put these teachings into practice. God is always ready to listen to you, to carry your burdens, and give you peace. So stop for a moment, pray, and trust in God's sovereignty and love. He knows your struggles, your fears, and your anxieties, and He wants to give you rest. Trust that He is watching over you, even when life seems uncertain. Remember that by handing over your worries to God, you are exchanging the weight you carry for His peace. Day after day, choose to walk alongside Christ, knowing that His will is perfect and that in His hands all things work together for good. Be still and know that He is God. Rest is there, at your disposal. All you have to do is trust.